Is your practice's culture specific or is it vague? It has to be specific. If your culture is vague, you don't really have much of a culture. It's just got to be specific enough. And my guest today has some ways on how to get started doing that. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of PracticeCare. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they want, but I really think that care is better when it's just you and your provider sitting at the table trying to figure out what's best for you, and nobody else is secretly whispering in your provider's ear what their agenda is. Not a hospital or a health system, owners in faraway lands, whoever they may be, it's just you and your provider trying to figure out what's best for you. And today, my guest is Kelly Wesner. Kelly owns and practices therapy at Maple Grove Therapy and Wellness in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Kelly's passion and expertise are to support women ages 16 and beyond through the journey of self-discovery and many times rediscovery. She provides individual therapy and parenting support with the use of evidence-based treatment modalities. Kelly, thanks for taking some time to come on PracticeCare.
Thank you, Carl. It's nice to be here.
Yes, on this joint snowy day, even though we are in different places. So it's always good to start off. Your bio that I had is necessarily short to kind of get us started. But if you wouldn't mind just kind of filling in a bit more about you so our listeners can get to know you a bit better.
I think direct and to the point with my bio is actually great because it leads into some of why our culture is the way that it is. I have been practicing since 2005, actually, and I've worked in lots of different areas, mainly providing leadership and therapy to all different kinds of ages. What I think is interesting about my private practice work is that I actually started it in 2015 while I was in a corporate leadership job. And then when we decided to go to a group practice was a few months before the pandemic. And so you want to talk about culture and establishing a culture. It was, I had an intention going into this, but then the pandemic just sort of took control and we needed something fast.
Okay.
But my bio, definitely where I come from is therapy and leadership. So that cultural aspect, along with providing care through the culture.
Right. So culture developed over Zoom, kind of, right?
Oh, goodness. I mean, it was like nothing I've ever done before. It was a great experience, actually, now that I can look back on it, in really how powerful culture is. And that culture can take you through really hard times and allow you still to be providing the care that, is a part of that was always the number one thing in our culture.
Right. Sure.
But how do you do that? How do you provide that culture?
Right.
Number one value.
Yeah. And let's get right into it. So to start, give us an overview of what your practice's culture is today, just so people we have like a reference point for how you got there.
Yes. Our culture is centered on providing the best care that we possibly can, which is not new that organizations or practices would come from a client first basis, but actually how we go about meeting that is very much therapist centered.
Okay.
So our culture is built off of feedback and engagement, which private practices, it can be quite solitary because your door is closed and you're serving people the majority of the time. And our culture is one of accountability, openness, engagement, and feedback. And a lot of those, because our culture very much believes in parallel process, we actually need to start individually and as a group first. Before we're going to be able to provide those types of things to our clients, which a lot of times feedback, engagement, openness, and accountability are what we need relationally.
So are those like the four pillars of your culture?
Yep. I would say those are words we've given. I think it looks lots of different ways, but our specific culture is definitely built on collaboration and connectedness, which honestly has a lot of behavioral components to it.
And that's between the therapist and the practice, you mean?
And all of us, exactly. It's it's difficult. It's quite difficult to be able to have a culture like that, depending on even what is happening in the world.
So accountability, inclusiveness, and the other two.
Well, feedback, engagement, openness, like if you think about those terms in general, you'd have to be in a certain spot to be able to have that within a culture, right? Ego strengths and things like that. So our value of being client-centered means in order to practice here, you have to be willing to do all of those things yourself.
Right. Okay. There it is. There's the
And
difference.
our belief is if you're not able to do those, right? If you can't hold yourself accountable, receive and give feedback, which we see as a sign of respect, not as a sign to like get you, right? It's because we want the best for you. And inevitably that means our clients or the people we serve.
Right.
That's hard. That's hard to put our egos aside.
Yeah. Especially when you're the one in the room with the client, nobody else is, right? You kind of really have to be unusually open-minded, rather than saying, well, you weren't there, you don't know. Yeah,
exactly. And if you don't have your own internal, systems worked out or understanding of yourself, kind of that in my bio, right? The discovery or rediscovery. If we don't know ourselves, we can show up in lots of different ways in those sessions that could potentially harm another person. And that's not what our business is.
Right. So
a lot of people don't talk about that though.
No. And how did you get there? So you're asking your team to, I guess, behave very differently than their natural inclination would be. And that's any culture is at its heart about behaviors that you do and don't want. So how did you arrive at this particular culture, at these particular specifics? Like, give us a sense of, because that's one of the hard parts of a culture. It's not just, aha, we've got it. It's the journey there. So how'd you get there?
Pain. There was a lot of painful moments. Actually, it was quite polarizing. There were some really beautiful moments where we could all feel, especially me, that we were on the right track. And there were some really painful points when there wasn't fits. And I think, honestly, how this culture came to be in part was out of my need and some of the clinicians that had come with me from my previous position, being ADHD.
Okay.
And in the Midwest, and this idea that directedness, especially for females, directedness is aggressive, it's mean, B word at times, right? Those kind of things. That's not only is that not okay to move us along, but certainly we wouldn't be directing our clients who were in positions like that to adhere to those types of norms. I need things to be direct.
Okay.
I am compassionately direct is what I say. I don't beating around the bush. Everybody thinks differently. So I don't assume, it's a natural thing for me not to assume that people think like me, because that's been my experience my entire life, right? But I'm not within the norm per se. And I don't believe that has to do with ADHD or a neurodiverse thing. I actually think people are the most successful when we can be direct and not personalize, but be open enough then to say like, wow, that really hurt, that feedback really hurt. I think that I would do better if blank, whatever the need might be. Most cultures do not do that, especially in the Midwest. It's organized lots of different ways. And I just couldn't be successful. And I saw all these women around me feeling lost and not supported, and not being able to just use some of their authentic way of being as actually an incredible strength in being able to provide that and not having it be judged or labeled. And so I think it almost came out of my own experience of that being invalidated, and just really wanting to have others feel success, whether it's the clients or clinicians. And it was through trial and error and seeing it work, seeing it work in a really big system of 150 plus employees, and then seeing it work on a really intimate level and seeing that translate into care and less burnout and financials even.
Yeah.
Which is less of a concern for me than a corporate level. Obviously, I have concerns with it, but it's very different in a corporate world than it is when it's, my own, where I can honestly say, I know that it translates, that I'm going to focus more on the cultural aspect than I am on the monies, because I don't have to.
Yeah.
If
well, the money will come. The money will come, right?
Yeah. People are engaged. If people are doing right by themselves by knowing who they are and what they bring in the room, they treat people better.
Yeah.
They can access more of their skills to be able to treat whoever's in the room.
Right. So I feel like I'm oversimplifying it when I say this, but is kind of the heart of your culture, we should behave with each other how we counsel our clients to behave? Or what is that?
Yeah, I mean, I love that because I do think we tend to complicate things, actually.
Yeah.
Because we get in the way. So I think that is the culture where we're saying, step out of the way a second so you can see it through clear eyes and not all of your own conditioning and whatnot.
Right.
So it's saying too, like, you have to understand that our lenses are colored. And so when you understand you don't ever really come from this spot of objectivity, you got to like set yourself straight a little bit.
Yeah.
You got to put yourself in your place a little bit.
So is it that, look, yesterday you told client X they need to be more accountable on that issue. You need to behave the same way, but you're ducking accountability right now. You can't do that. Is that kind of a window into the culture?
Yeah, accountability around, being a therapist and sitting with people all day and holding space for that, but then not having the value to also go to therapy to make sure that, you're owning your own stuff and taking care of what's yours. That's inevitably in the room with you, right? Like, I want those words and actions to match. And I hold people accountable to that. And that you won't be a fit. Yeah. Honestly, you won't be a fit. The culture, you've got a couple of things you can do with culture. You can stay and fight it. You can acquiesce and conform, or you can leave or be told to leave.
Right.
And we're who we are here because our value is client-centered, and that directly translates into how we treat ourselves even.
Right.
And that's hard. It's even hard for therapists. I will say I think there's a lot of assumptions in my world.
I'm sure. And it's hard for anybody to take a look in the mirror and admit things they don't want to admit or acknowledge things they don't want to. It's so easy to do. It's just really easy to do. And you're so right about the Midwest. I'm from the Northeast. I'm a nicer person today just because it's so nice out here, but less gets done, I think, compared to, like I say to my wife every once in a while, look, I need to get New York nice on this person. It's still very nice, but we haven't gotten anywhere with Midwest nice. And so I just got to just turn it up just a little bit because we have to get X resolved. Is that okay? Yeah, that's okay.
People always
it's got its virtues. It's so nice out here. I'm a nicer person, but we don't get as much done in the same amount of time.
That's an interesting way of putting it. Yes, I agree. I was confused at first when I first got into the working world. People would ask me where I'm from, and they would have this assumption that I am from the East Coast because of how direct I was. But it was said not in like a positive affirming way, right? And so I had to do, I had to do some digging. I had to do some digging on that. It's like, wait a minute, how did this get to be that being open and direct is a bad thing? How does anybody get their needs met? I was confused, right? Like, that's a block for me. I didn't understand it. And so I just started navigating in a way that felt good and that got stuff done.
Right. So your culture is, it's these five, the five tenets of how we want to behave, how we're advocating our clients to behave, and we should eat our own cooking is essentially kind of what it is. So how did you get it So that's an idea, right? You start with, we need to do more of this. And then you got it to these 5 specific behaviors. How did you go from the idea to the 5 specific behaviors? What was that journey? What kind of tools helped you? Because it feels like, and there's also a balance of specificity. I don't want people to think like you've got to have a culture that's, micromanaging and anal and really to the nth degree. No, that's not the case. You can't live that way either. There's definitely a balance, but in between that and we need to behave better, that's somewhere in there is the sweet spot. And that's what you found. How did you get there? Because I'm thinking the people who are listening to this going, she's onto something. I think she's right about us. Now, what do I do? So you don't have to like lay out a roadmap, but what are some, how'd you get there?
Talking. We talked, we created safe spaces, and we took everybody's talent, the people that were involved, right, in this group. We took our individual talents for certain things, and I don't know that I would say that we analyzed it, but we brain dumped and we just kept polishing these ideas. So it was really, really big at first, actually.
And this is you and your team?
Yeah, it's grown now, right? Sure. But it was like some trusted advisors and different kinds of levels of people. When I say that, I mean levels of experience, right? So you have all kinds of things, ages, that kind of stuff. People who generally tend to play devil's advocate, kind of the change process, and used some of that change process. So it wasn't everybody just agreeing to it, right? It was just talking at first, and it was really big. It was whiteboards full of things. What have we seen work? Even if we want, like when we came up with this culture, we wanted it to be natural because we want people to be here that can be successful within that. And it definitely takes a certain temperament or personality to be successful in that.
Okay.
But it came out of something I think lots of people deal with, and that was a hard time retaining employees. And the amount of stress that caused, and it came out of this employee engagement. And for me, because of the way that my brain works, is I mean, I can have more thoughts before breakfast than, some people have their entire day. And so I can't hang on to every little thing. But I was like, I don't think that employee engagement is just it. Like that can't be the be all end all. How does that happen? Everybody's so different. Everybody needs different things. And then it sort of spiraled from there. And it was, how do we feel good? How do we get to a point where we feel good in such a stressful job when we've got to hold these things for people that are traumatizing to them and can be, traumatizing to us then as well. And these words just started to come, like, or experiences, feel it, how they felt in certain situations. And then like the words to describe it came. I mean, what do you do with feedback, openness? There's not 1 or 2 behaviors with that. So it's not fixed in that way because everybody's so different. So, right? So it's not, it's not openness means this specifically. It's not. Is how do we engage with, we actually call it FIOA because I feel like this is what people do. We need to create acronyms to remember stuff. But it started from one small concept that you've got to keep employees. And I thought this is a really big topic.
It is. And we've had a few other guests come on. We've talked about culture a fair amount here on the podcast. And one of the common, for those who come on and say, tips on how to keep employees, tips on engagement, and culture is either at the top or near the top. And the common refrain is, and why is that? They say, look, whether you define it or not, people here act a certain way and they have certain expectations. And if you define them in a culture, then you can look for them when you're hiring and you can look for them when you retain. And if somebody wants to quit for more money down the street, you could say, look, I can't stop you, but you better make sure that they act the way you like, because that's what you're going to be living in. And you like it here. So let's talk money, but and there's more to a job than that. And even when they start throwing money at people, if there's a crazy culture or a bad culture or no culture, those people typically end up leaving anyway, just with more money in the meantime. And so it's really, It's really consistent in how in the
Wow.
answer to that, and all of them have a pretty well defined culture.
Yeah, I think that it comes down to the F word. I think it comes down to feeling. And feelings aren't facts, right? So I don't have
Mhm.
to prove why we're the best here and why the culture is healthy and this and that. People can feel it. I mean, our
Mhm.
clients can even feel it when they come in and they'll talk about it. And they want me to, like, why is that? Or even to define it. And I say, like, I think when you get to a certain spot with the feedback and the engagement, the openness, knowing that there's comfort and security and
Mhm.
holding another person accountable to make sure they're showing up their best selves, or even holding them when they can't,
Mhm.
creates good feelings. And
Yeah.
people want to work when they feel good. And when you feel like you're a part of something bigger, and truly that there is care and compassion to be the best you can be. I know that not every culture is like that. I've felt it.
Mhm.
I have felt that I need to change and acquiesce. And MGTW's culture is, we have these expectations, but please tell us how to meet these kind of, cultural goals through your own temperament and personality.
Mhm.
It's not me deciding. It's how are you with how, with who you are and your own values. What do you think? How does feedback play a role? It doesn't look the same with every single one of us,
Mhm.
but the foundation is the same,
And
meaning we
is
all
there
have these things.
right? So if I worked for you, and my, I don't know, my version of feedback, or what I think good feedback looks like, looks different than yours, you're saying that's fine. But is there like some sort of minimum standard? Like, look, Carl, you have to at least accept this, because here at MGTW, this is part of what we do. And like, if there's if
Yes.
there's if there's 50 employees and there's 50 different definitions of feedback, it feels like that might become a problem,
Oh,
you know?
absolutely. The one thing is that when you are giving or receiving, whether it's feedback and any of the things that I've talked about, is you are going to come from a spot of positive intent. And if you cannot do that because other things are getting in the way, and I'm going to be honest, most of the time it's therapists not doing their own work.
You heard it here first, people.
And so if you're going to personalize and you're going to get so caught up in all of your own stuff, your intention is going to, either your intention is going to change, or you're also going to read somebody else's intention as malicious. And you have to be able to let go of some of those conditioned things and recognize that anybody giving feedback is doing it because they truly care about you and who you serve. And it's never done in a way that is, na boo boo, or look at you,
Mhm.
not doing this over there. It's like, hey, I've noticed this. Let's have a conversation. But it is the belief. It's given out of respect and received that way. But
Yeah,
that means you have to believe that in another person. And honestly, I do not think that that's the natural way. And
it's
it
not.
and it's hard for people. I experience it all the time here when people come in, and it's like half and half. And
Hmm.
people can actually get through their lens, the fog, before they can get to seeing why it's being said, and that it's meant to bring growth and development, and not hurt. It
Yeah,
brings hurt when we personalize or we think something ill of the other person. And I don't
correct.
think we don't have space for that here.
No, there's no time, and it wasn't meant that way. People are better and kinder and more well intentioned than it seems in the moment. Nobody likes criticism, and it's always taken that way. You know,
Yeah.
a company I used to work for, they had a saying for it I really liked, which was "Listen with the intent to be influenced." It's not a commitment, but it's like, just
Ah,
keep an open mind. I mean, well, you don't have all the good ideas. Why don't you just listen to somebody else? And um,
I love that.
so there's some cool catchy phrases from that place, and that's one of them. Listen with the
Yeah,
intent to be influenced. I was like,
phrases help.
how do
Phrases
you
help.
argue with how do you
Remember
argue with
things.
that?
You
What
know,
kind of person could legitimately argue with that one?
I truly care. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think I'm astonished that that's hard for people coming from other places. That can be destabilizing to people to truly believe that this is coming from a place of caring, because a lot of people, especially in the Midwest, don't like conflict. And
No.
I'm like this, that is not at all what this is about, but that it gets triggered in people.
Right.
But for me, it's
Maybe you were secretly adopted and nobody ever told you. And you're just
oh
like,
my gosh,
you're from Wall Street, and you're like from Wall Street, right? You're like from the belly of the beast, ground zero directness, and nobody ever told you.
I do wonder some things about this whole directive. Honestly, it goes back to that feelings, right? I think it does go back to feelings even. And I want to feel that me being naturally who I am is not offensive, because I'm not meaning it to be offensive, right? Like the goal of it is not just because I happen to live here. I mean, it's something I fight culturally. It is. It's like, it's talked about in interviews. I talk about who I am. I explain myself in a way that is necessary and feels good. I do not explain myself further than that, though, as a way of like, I think that hurts a culture. Is like somebody feeling like they have to continually explain. No, I'm just letting people understand to the level that I understand me.
Right.
And I can be more effective like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that we get together and we're having these mini therapy sessions. No, we're just doing right by each other and the people that we serve. We take it very seriously. And I think that means discomfort on our part sometimes.
Sometimes. Yeah.
Don't like it. Yeah. I mean, it's actually a lot, but that can be hard. I get that.
And you've got your culture down to what was the acronym?
FEOA, FEOA, feedback, engagement, openness, and accountability.
So,
and the underlying value is just that,
right.
Serving people to the best of our ability means we also have to hold ourselves accountable to knowing ourselves.
Right. But imagine that you stopped and look, we have to serve people to the best of our ability. You could line up 15 people and tell them that and say, what do you think that means? And you're going to get 15 different answers. As it is, even with FEOA, you're probably going to get a few different answers. So you have to define it. You got to write it out, remind people of it, point it out when you see it, and point it out when you don't. Probably, I mean, you're nodding your head. Nobody else can see this, but you don't just sort of write it up one day and then stick it on the shelf and say, but you knew, we went through this. But how did you know when you got it specific enough for you? When did you say, all right, we're good? Not that you're ever done, but.
Oh, totally.
But when did you get to the point and go, there it is?
Yeah, I agree that I'm, especially being a neurodiverse and having 90% of my therapists and consultants here and whatnot are neurodiverse too. I don't think it's ever done, because we think we have amazing ideas all the time, right? So we bring it to the table, and does this fit with basically that FEOA is our foundation, and we can add and subtract a lot of things from it. But it was feeling. I honestly, I can't pinpoint that in a concrete way, because it was felt by more than just me. Mm-hmm. It was a feeling. It was oh my goodness, like we all sat, and it wasn't even just everybody a part of the group. It was everybody, and we kind of just, as we were debriefing, I think the question was that, do you feel the difference? Do you feel things changing? And everybody felt better. Like
well, that's legit.
Anxiety.
Yeah, that's legit.
Sure, it really was. Like, it was, the concepts and the behaviors were felt on kind of, a biological level, like deep. And then we were able to move on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, then when that was felt, and we were like, yeah, we're going to have other things we're going to add to this. But I think for a foundation, this is it. We don't want to bog down. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. I mean, how much more can you go? I mean, 4 is already, I mean,
it's true. A good it's true. You can have, it's what's right for you. There is no universal definition. Yeah.
It grows because we're developmentally, right? Like, because of this culture, we continue to grow. We don't sit still. Mm-hmm. The foundation, though, still works. So it was felt as though this is solid, and then proven it by that foundation doesn't really change, but our ideas or how to facilitate it does.
Right. So you have in our conversation here, you've described on the one hand what it came from. It started with employees. We need to make so that needs to get better. But And then, it's great now, things are really working out, but you've also described it as it was hard, it was an uncertain path. It took a lot of work to put together. So, I'm thinking of to all the naysayers out there who are listening, going, "Oh, do I really have to do this?" Like, yeah, I hear how important it is, but do you really think I should do this for us, for my practice? I just want to treat patients. That's why I started this whole thing. I didn't think about any of this. And now you're telling me, oh, and by the way, it's all on feel, which, plenty of parts of the healthcare world are much more, clinical, analytical, whatever. What's the evidence?
Yeah.
Jesus, Kelly, are you sure? Do I really have to do this? And your answer is, what do you say to that? I think of, well, you don't, but just understand the trade-offs. But what do you say?
I honestly, self-determination, obviously, in therapy is a really big thing. And so, no, I don't think you have to do anything. A couple things, though, is that I would really challenge some thought on what that means for your goal, which is, I just want to treat people. And that's phenomenal. Have that energy to treat people. I would challenge, how does one do that if this not having a culture or not being intentional about that? You can't really say that that doesn't get in the way. So are you actually doing what you want to do, which is treating people? I get that it's overwhelming at times and that feelings are not concrete. Putting into words, coming to a place that truly settles you and makes you feel like you're understood and belonged is just not something I can explain it. But until you feel it, I don't know that you would push yourself to do some of these incredibly difficult things. You know what I mean? And a part of my life has been having to do really difficult things to get to a goal. And so, no, you don't have to do anything. But I don't want to be mediocre.
Yeah. That's
I
really,
do with humans. I do with humans, and I'm value-based, and that's hard for me to be intentionally choosing not to develop and grow because it might be hard. And so I challenge it's not every day that this stuff is being challenged. People need to understand that too, is that you put the work in to get to the spot. And one of the questions I would have is, if you could get to a spot where you work in a place, whether it's yours or elsewhere, like you work in this place where you have a sense of belonging and understanding, I would ask, what do you think that would do for you? And then let the rest be, right? Like first daydream. What would that be like to go to a place like that? How would that transform my practice? How about my burnout, my energy level? And it all translates. And until you feel it, as mushy as maybe that might be, until you feel it, I really do think that there's a blockage with people to push themselves. It's a difference between left and right brain, especially when it's not concrete. And sometimes you do have to feel like these things are possible, and that you can have, they can look like this, they can feel like that.
And if you've worked in an environment before where you hated it, why do you think that is? I mean, take a fresh look. It's probably because the culture was a disaster for you. You didn't fit. You didn't, not you, Kelly, but you, whoever, you didn't fit. You didn't fit. And maybe there's another place where you loved it. Well, you probably fit really well. And now here you are running a practice. Guess what? Other people, you get to determine that, and you should, because people who fit well perform better and don't come to you asking for money as much and just do their job better. Wouldn't you want that? And doesn't that make, well, you're saying, doesn't that make patient care just that much better?
It all goes hand in hand. It really does. When you start to see all the wheels turning together and affecting all of those little offshoots, it's really hard to deny. It just is. And I have had my critics. I have come across people who are, even though it's my business, they come in and are, those three choices, right? They're either going to push status quo, conform, leave, or one way leave. I've had people come and push and try to change it. And it is normally to adhere to their own limitations. And I say that I get to choose, and that gets to be where you're at. And this gets to be a fit issue, not a less than issue, or anything like that, because that is not where we come from. It just gets to be a lack of fit, and I don't want to damage, and we don't want to be damaged in those ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, it's got to be intentional, and it means difficult things. And sometimes it means conflict,
Mm-hmm.
and that is hard,
Yeah.
but it's worth it.
Well, it is, because if you don't, it festers, it gets worse than the conflict ever would have been. It's so true.
It seeps into other employees. It seeps into so many things.
It does. It does. And man, we could go on for a long time on this, but in the interest of kind of bringing us to the finish line, a couple of wrap up questions I ask every guest. The first one is there anything you think I should have asked you, but just didn't, that you think our listeners need to know about?
No, I don't. I think this is a wonderful thing that you do, creating space to have some of these conversations and being able to learn from each other. I think there are things that came up that would be other podcasts, right? Like you can only do so much in the amount of time. I think great questions. Stuff is great. I really, it gives me passion to see other people having passion about getting the word out about this type of stuff. I like the direction. No, I think it was great.
Thank you. Thank you. We're one voice in a loud windstorm, trying to get to be a bigger voice. Definitely. And my other question is, so, we've caught the attention of somebody with this episode, and they're like, I want to get going on that. We really, our culture isn't what it should be. It isn't at all, whatever. But, they don't know where to get started. So do you have one or two recommendations that they could get started on to go down this long feelings-based path the moment that they're done, listening to this?
Yeah, if only, right? It could be all feeling based. No, I first things first, I would say, if leaders could find other leaders to mentor, or even to be a sounding board, and you don't have to be extroverted for this, or even an external processor, but I do feel like getting it out of your body. So finding a way, just very first, to it's raw, and it needs to be raw and not polished. And so finding a way to do that. It might not always look like having people within your own environment to do this with right away. Maybe that needs to be a trusted advisor elsewhere, or even a friend or a business associate or something like that. And I think that you just got to start facilitating or engaging in a discussion around what are some of the things that I want. Mine really started from one thing. It really started from being aware internally, so that we can treat without damage or minimizing damage. Like, I felt like that was an incredible responsibility. Whether, like, it started in school and it has just progressed throughout my career. I take it very seriously. And so it came out of one thing, and that's the thing it came out of. So
you saying that for you made this connection between workplace culture and the quality with which you treat clients. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I love how you articulated that. In my non-neurodiverse way, there's 1,000 ways. That is right. That's exactly it. It just came out of one thing. And the thing, I will say, it came out of a value. Right.
Yeah.
And then went from there.
Yeah.
It wasn't polished at all.
Right. So tip number one is start talking about it to other people. Maybe there's some good coaches out there, and just do you deal with workplace culture? Right. I'd like somebody maybe to have a look at ours and just tell us what you think. Kind of like, Dr. X, you're listening to this, patient comes to you, something hurts. What do? You work them up. Well, then you come to your diagnosis. Well, maybe, turn the mirror on yourself, on your culture, and just have a look at this, to do anything with it, but have somebody knows what they're talking about, look at it and see what they say. Yeah. That's a good tip.
I really do think, like, the four, FIOA came out of these discussions, is what it was. Like, they came out of just discussing it.
Yeah.
And it was almost like even me discussing what I wanted is like somebody reflecting back to me. It sounds like this. It sounds like this. And that's how it started to form. And not everybody's going to be like that, because I'm not as linear, right? With being ADHD. And so it's more ideas first, and then letting the solutions come from that.
Yeah. And you got to be willing to be patient with that. And say, the way I say it
Ooh.
is the uncertainty gets bigger before it gets smaller as you just, the, you pull on one thread and six more and it just gets bigger before it gets smaller. But you
Yes.
did, maybe it was from your leadership experience, of all the things that anybody who's getting trained in healthcare, whether it's medical, dental, mental, whatever, is that they don't get on the business
Nope.
side is leadership, right? So they don't get the leadership training, and culture is like kind of at the core of one of the part of the core of leadership. They don't get it. But you had the idea of, when you sat down to start your journey of talking and whiteboarding and everything else, you sounds like you did have some idea of, well, you had an idea of what good looks like, not specifically, but I'll have an idea when we're done. You got to have an idea when you're done if you're going to go down this path. Otherwise, you're never going to go. And
Oh, and
so you got to
yep.
have that too. And that's why talking to other people, I think, if you're not really not sure about this, how do we know when we're done? It's a good question. And ask
Yeah. And
15 people until you get an answer. They go, oh, now I understand. We know when we're done when.
yeah, and getting other people's ideas doesn't mean you're going to go down every single one of those trains of thought. It's the more ideas you have or different ways of thinking about something, the more you can polish your own. And I will say that as far as that initial value, I didn't get help with that initial value from external people. That was something I came up with in myself. I didn't want that to be
Yeah.
a free for all. This is how this is starting, and it's not negotiable.
There it
And
is.
then
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. There it is.
Then you start involving other people after you have that. Otherwise, you're going to get lost.
Mm-hmm.
And
There it
so be
is.
patient and have grace with yourself. It's not like every day you're getting a pat on the back saying, this is working.
Good
This is
culture talk today.
working. Keep doing
Yeah.
it.
Right.
You got
Right.
it, right? I mean, part of this is you got to be ready for it,
Mm-hmm.
and ego strength and confidence in
Yeah.
your leadership and your true value of why you're doing it has to stay near and dear.
Yeah. And I say this
Be
hoping
ready.
that, and I say this hoping that it lets people off the hook. There are no clinical studies for this. There's no treatment algorithms for this. There's no, there's a lot of good practices and things, but you kind of got to dive into the pool and
Yeah.
find the current and go where it goes. Right. So, and but have an idea of, we have an idea we're done when,
And have a
blah.
cheerleader. Have a cheerleader too that says you got this. Have people who are,
Yeah.
by your side, because there isn't,
Yeah.
research and things like that that are going to be telling you every step of the way you're on the right track. It
Exactly.
does have to be feeling. Some of it does.
Yes, yes. Get used to it. Get used to it. Well, good. Kelly,
Yeah.
this has been a great conversation. I think really
Wonderful.
insightful. Culture's not easy, but man, it's important. And look, culture's a competitive advantage too, right? Dr. X,
Yes,
whoever you
it
are
is.
listening, I promise you, most around you who you compete with don't have it. And it shows up in all sorts of ways. So it's worth the work.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
So once again, Kelly Wesner with Maple Grove Therapy and Wellness. Thanks for coming on. We're going to put the contact information that you gave me into the show notes. So, if you've picked anybody's interest and they want to talk with you more, they'll have a chance to contact you. And a couple of other points before we wrap up. If you've got an experience with the business side of practice like Kelly has, that you think others would benefit from hearing about, or if you're someone like me that seeks to serve private practices and you want to bring your expertise on and share it, we want you to come on PracticeCare. In the show notes for Kelly's episode and every episode are instructions on how to do that. Just a link, a couple of questions. Tell us what's on your mind so we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And also, if you haven't done so already, really would like you to subscribe to PracticeCare on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks very much. And until next time.